I will introduce to you our panel moderator, Katisha Harrison. She is the medical economics analyst at Bon Secure Health Systems at St. Mary's Hospital, where she leverages her analytical expertise to identify performance successes and areas of focus to initiate process and performance improvements to support a world-class quality of care. She holds a Bachelor in Science in Information Systems and Decision Sciences and a Master's of Public Administration. So join me in welcoming Katisha. Thanks.
So thank you all for staying and joining us today. Before we actually get started today, I would like for the additional panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves to the group. Today we will be focusing our panel discussion around healthcare informatics to solve clinical needs, and would welcome from the beginning any questions or thoughts that you'd like to share as we continue to discuss this robust topic throughout the council meeting.
Live. I'm Bob Greenis. I chair the Department of Biomedical Informatics at Arizona State University. Kind of an unusual environment there. We don't have a medical center of our own, but we are partnered with a number of organizations within the Phoenix area, and with a particular partnership at Mayo Clinic, where we are actually physically located. Our academic department is on the Mayo Clinic campus in Scottsdale. And we're involved in a number of things where, beside our academic programs, master's and doctoral program, we're really trying to build an environment where we can train individuals to be transforming agents as we go through this process of transforming our healthcare system. So we want individuals that are conversant in informatics, organization, information flow, big data analytics, a variety of other skills that are going to be needed.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patrick Sullivan. I'm the director of the Captain James A. Lovell Federal Healthcare Center. We're about 35 miles northeast of here on Lake Michigan, about halfway between Chicago and Milwaukee. We are the first integrated VA DoD Federal Healthcare Center. We're only about 2 years old. It brought together the former North Chicago VA Medical Center, that's where I came out of the VA system, and the former Naval Hospital and then Naval Health Clinic, Great Lakes. Two different cabinet agencies with two very distinct histories, two separate EMRs, and lots of opportunity and lots of challenges that go along with that. The VA has been an accountable care organization for probably decades in terms of providing care to an enrolled population across a continuum from home care to ambulatory care to acute care, full scope of mental health services, telehealth, telemedicine, long-term care, and hospice care. One of the challenges that we have had an EMR for over 20 years. My organization has been paperless for probably the last 16 years. We have lots of data that we're able to use to drive organization behavior to improve care, and improve, and in the process, hopefully improve outcomes. One of the things that we've done also, and then I'll turn the mic over, is we've, by becoming this new federal healthcare center, we inherited two legacy medical records. The VISTA system on the VA side and the ALTA system on the DoD side. And a major project that we've been involved with for about the last 4 years, and in part, I think that's why I'm here. I'm sort of an accidental IT CEO person, is to make these two legacy medical records interoperable. So we actually use both medical records at our institution, and the challenge is how do we operate those and care for each individual patient at a time. So I can talk more about that. We've been involved in true interoperability of data for lab and radiology and patient identity consults, where the information moves between both medical records and is interoperable, not just viewable.
Thank you, Patrick. And last but not least, David.
Sure. Hi, good afternoon. I'm David Volcano. I'm the responsible executive for clinical research at HCA, which is Hospital Corporation of America. I'm not an IT guy. I don't know what 3/4 of the IT people in our company do, even after I hear their titles. But I'm more of an operator and a regulatory affairs person, and brought to HCA about 5 or 6 years ago to bring some consistency, organization, and strategic planning for their clinical research initiatives. So the clinical research involves your typical clinical trials and other healthcare operations research, but lately, and obviously part of the reason for here is convergence to EHRs brings a renaissance of data research that's available. So we talk about trying to find the best practices and sharing those. We're me and the group that I work with and the customers I work with, we're trying to find the next practices. We're not interested in the best practices. The best practices today for us are old. We're trying to find what is the next, and I try to put those pieces together and do so in a way that is both has regulatory compliance and deals with the ethics. A great quote that was said that the medical researchers deal with things not only before the general medical community deals with them, but also before the compliance officers, the lawyers, the ethicists, the politicians, and all those other people deal with them too. So we have to figure out all of that as well as its applicability in medicine. I've seen a lot of good medicine come and go because of poor planning around that. These are wonderful ideas, and it would be great if we can get it to patients, but bad regulatory affairs strategy, bad business plans make a lot of these things are obstacles to these things getting into medicine. So I've dealt with a lot of venture capital companies and angel investment groups as we work with entrepreneurs to help them and mentor them to say, hey, if you want to do research, if you want to get this, these are the types of things that you need to be considering to, get it forward.
Great. So thank you for that. So as you noticed, as with many of the other panels, we do have a diverse population of subject matter expertise up here. So we'll lead with our first question being, in the different roles in your hospitals or organization, how do you drive the clinical care in that organization? Or if you could please provide a specific example of how you've been able to help drive your organization forward.
I could start. The VA and also DOD, the Navy in this case, we have clinical performance measures for probably over 100 different elements that we measure on a regular basis. We maintain a scorecard, and the measures are probably artifacts, at least, of good outcomes. I think we're evolving with all of you in terms of are we truly improving health. I think it'll take a while to be able to get there, but we have comprehensive performance measures in everything from prevention to the HEDIS measures, the ORICs, the SCIP measures for surgery, and mental health measures, behavioral health measures, preventive measures, and we track those on a monthly basis by, in most cases, by provider, and provide real-time feedback to our providers in terms of how well they're performing in meeting these measures. We're benchmarked against a standard. They're mostly, if not a national standard that's been set, it's set within the Department of Veterans Affairs that we're measured against in terms of how well we're doing.
So my own particular interest and focus over a number of years has been in clinical decision support, which is the flip side of quality performance measurement, is how do you proactively ensure that best practices are followed. And actually, in working with Mayo Clinic, we just had a meeting about a year ago where the 4 sites, Mayo Clinic has 3 hospitals in Florida, Arizona, and in Minnesota, and then a healthcare system also in the upper Midwest. And so there are 4 different systems, each with a whole variety of decision rules and other knowledge artifacts. And it actually amounts to several thousand of them. And so one question is how to represent them, how to manage them, how to interface them with the different workflows and environments to actually get them to work. Because we actually want to, at the end of the day, improve the quality performance. And so there is a whole, if anybody wants to discuss this, there's a whole lot of technology innovation that's going on right now to try to tie this together nationally. And we're involved in some of those projects and kind of testing that out at Mayo.
Great. And David?
Well, part of my challenge is a little bit different. You know, we have, if I used this example yesterday at our table, but if you think of outcomes as a bell curve, you have certainly individuals and procedures or practice that, you know, are going to have less than optimal outcomes and ones that have exceedingly optimal and everybody else is in the middle somewhere. You know, there's clinical excellent folks that will try to, you know, kind of beat the providers into submission of getting them out of that horrible outcome area and at least into normal outcomes by changing their practices. My area here, at least, is to at least show that, you know, if you have everybody in clinical innovation or in clinical excellence programs and everybody's practicing evidence-based medicine, well, that sounds really good, but we've killed innovation because innovators have no peers. You don't have evidence for innovation. So the challenge is not only, you know, all these different programs to beat the providers into submission or to try to decrease unjustified variance, but also find those pockets where people are doing excellent work and try to find those things and find out why that is happening and foster that to make that the next practice.
So, I'm sorry.
Follow. So there are a couple of other things, though, that are challenging that. First of all, as genomics and the need to individualize the care process occurs, the innovation is occurring, and you have to kind of update your knowledge base, your institutional knowledge base, and also educate the providers about how to use, you know, which drugs to prescribe for which gene markers that are present, and so on. And so it actually becomes increasingly difficult to do that, and doing the update and the management of that knowledge.
To add on to what Bob said about decision support, we do concurrent reminders. We do reminders for all patient visits depending upon what it is that the patient needs, what tests they might require, whether it's monitoring their cholesterol or glucose, or did they have their breast exam or pelvic exam or whatever it is they happen to require for that visit, preventive focus in many cases. And then we also run a concurrent look at that every week so that if we missed a patient, we can then reach out to that patient and be sure that they've had that exam or that test. So we have had very good luck with that, and all of our results get verified independently through a independent medical record review that comes in that demonstrates that we're doing what we say we're doing.
Are there any questions at this point from the audience? Okay, moving to the next question. So we've talked about best practices. We've also referenced the vast amount of data that we know that is available currently. In your organizations, how do you continue to use this information in your reporting and decision-making process to help to solve your additional clinical needs?
To help resolve
To help solve some of your...
solve clinical
Yes.
needs? Well, I think, I don't know if I'm directly answering your question, so you can come back to me if you'd like. One of the things that we do with the performance measures and the data that we get is try to talk about how it's improving patient care. Our providers are motivated to want to do a better job in taking care of their patients, and so rather than talking about the measure for the measure's sake, we talk about, and this is physician-led for the most part, or clinician-led, depending upon the area that we're looking at. Why is it important that we're measuring this, and how is this going to improve care to our patients? And that we find is a motivator for our providers and for our staff as we move forward. One of the things that's evolving now, very recently within the VA as well, is trying to negotiate the measure between the patient and the provider, so that rather than mandating, if you will, a particular cholesterol level or a hemoglobin, whatever it happens to be, the provider and the patient can talk about it and can establish what that measure is going to be for that patient, and we can pull that data, so that if you have a patient with 8 or 10 chronic conditions, maybe what we think is important is not what's important to the patient. So we think that's going to be an evolution in terms of our performance measures, is negotiating them or setting them between the provider and the patient.
If I could add something, I always give the example of the RITA database to kind of talk to your point on that. Is anybody familiar with the RITA database? I know I told somebody about it before. RITA is the database put forth by the FAA that measures planes, when they take off, when they land, and that sort of thing. So how many individuals have backed off of a runway only to sit on the tarmac for an hour or two or more?
Yes.
Well, according to RITA, that's a good thing because it got an on-time departure. So when it backs out from the gate, it's logged into database as an on-time departure. If it sits in a tarmac, well, that's not an on-time departure. That's a different statistic. That's a air traffic control statistic, not an airline statistic. So as long as they backed out the gate, they can log an on-time departure. Now, is that quality reported the same as the quality experienced by the individuals? No. So,
Right.
to your point, what we measure, we have to make sure that it is something that the patients, I mean, in the RITA case, the traveler, but in our field, what the patient is really, truly wanting.
Yes, sir.
So one of the things that I think about when you're talking about this is data is usually after the fact. Reporting scorecards, reporting performance. What is the future, though, when we can get to, and I always like this word, clinically relevant, actionable information that's happening at the point of care, that
Right.
now I've got data to pull from, that now I'm making a patient outcome decision based upon empirical data that we've collected over time.
So we are doing a kind of a pilot project to try to develop management protocols for chronic disease, as everybody is. And where the idea is to be able to kind of construct a template for that care based on patients like mine. In other words, finding from the cohort the patients that are as similar as possible, and then identifying which items were relevant to the care of that patient, which decisions were relevant to the outcomes, and actually displaying the outcomes. We don't quite have the databases constructed to be able to do that yet, and there's a combination of NLP techniques and probabilistic techniques that are being used to try to augment that, but that's kind of a future goal that we're striving for. I don't know if that gets at what you're looking for, but that's one of the things we're trying to do.
For us, it's the clinical reminder system, so that when Mr. Smith comes in or Mrs. Jones comes in, the provider knows what needs to be done relative to their cholesterol management, their diabetes control, whatever it happens to be. So on that visit, even before that visit, we know what that patient's data looks like. The member of the medical home team may see that patient first, talk to them about their need for a mammogram or some other preventive care, and the patient can get it at that visit.
So that does tap into some of the things even in my organization, where we are working on building out our clinical informatics and looking at invoking real-time data to assist in clinical care, as well as looking at the predictive and the prescriptive model and being able to forecast potential readmissions, things of that nature, in hopes for us to provide our patients with additional tools to potentially mitigate those. Just to pose a question to the audience, are there any tools or best practices that you'd like to share with the group on how your organization may be utilizing real-time or predictive tools to assist in your solving your patients' clinical needs? Are there any additional comments
We're
on
all
it from the
stuck.
panel? Are we all in the same place? We're working on it. We're trying to get those things currently figured out. Okay. So moving on to one of the questions that was also submitted. We've talked about our patients. We've spoken about our providers. But one of the questions we have here is, how can the healthcare organizations be more effective in working with vendors as well to address the needs that may not be directly met by our current systems? Any insights from the panel?
So actually, this is a topic of considerable passion for us. We are working with some colleagues, not only at Mayo Clinic, but some of the other larger health systems, including the VA, on trying to kind of evolve the next generation health record system, because we're not totally satisfied with the existing systems that are out there, no offense, that really inhibit the kind of care and continuity of care that we want to have. So our idea is really to kind of develop the essentially an app-oriented framework for developing the kinds of interactions and care flow and information flow that we want to have, and then working with the vendors that are willing to work with us to help enable that. Now, that's starting to have some traction, I would say very early traction, because we have some high-profile medical centers that are part of this initiative, and I'm actually taking a sabbatical for the next year, trying to kind of nurture that initiative, because I think that we are at a moment in time where our industry has a lot of legacy systems that are actually holding back the kind of care transformation that we want to see. This is a whole much bigger topic, but I think we are, limited in what, and it's not that the vendors are necessarily being obstinate, but they, like the healthcare organizations, are up to their ears in just trying to satisfy certification meaningful use requirements and satisfying their legacy customers and moving them along, that there really is very little bandwidth left to innovate. And so we think that some of the leading places, Mayo, Intermountain, Kaiser, others could really kind of take the lead in defining new models of care and information flow, the VA, and develop basically a three-tiered architecture where the vendor system is at the bottom and where you have some degree of interoperability across the systems and can build apps, not just mobile apps, but apps that sit on top of the existing EHR framework to be able to do the kinds of innovation that we want to see.
I relate to the question in two ways. One, on the local level, at level of this project we've been involved with in trying to achieve interoperability between these two legacy systems has been the agile development process, where we work with the IT folks, with the vendors, and with our providers as we're developing the solutions for our requirements, and make adjustments as we move forward and discover things that maybe hadn't been planned, or business processes that change. And so in our case, I think that the vendors have been very open to working with us, and as a result, we've gotten a better product with better buy-in. On the national level, Big VA is going to open source architecture for our entire EMR. And so this, I've got some gray hair, this harkens back to the days when the VA's, to me, when the VA's electronic medical record was originally developed, we have a tremendous number of very smart providers that work in our system, a tremendous number of very smart IT folks that work in our system, a lot of smart people that work in industry are now going to be able to evolve our electronic medical record through the open source to create something that is very provider, patient centered. So I have a lot of optimism as to the potential for how that can improve on what is already a very good electronic medical record.
I don't have the pleasure of dealing with vendors as much, but in many cases, we are a vendor, at least when we're doing development of new medical products. So, I would use the EMR systems to try to decrease the cost of and decrease the time to develop new products. So in the past 10 years or so, the average drug to get FDA approval has gone from a little over $800 million to $1.2 billion, and that's just the average drug to get FDA approval. The time has lengthened, so in a 20-year patent life, that time is probably 14 years or so, so you have more money and less time to make up on that. So that's part of the reason our drugs are obviously so expensive, is to recoup the investment in the development of those. So if we can use these systems to help the innovators develop the new therapeutics, as well as help them do post-marketing surveillance of these therapeutics so that we can learn more about them, work with the FDA to get drugs approved earlier with a more robust post-marketing surveillance, and we can do a little bit less on the front end and more on the back end, and get therapeutics to patients a lot quicker and less expensive.
Thank you. And David, you mentioned part of in your research work. One of the questions that we have is, what should we watch out for when using data for research purposes?
Yeah, there's a few things. I look at predominantly three areas. There's research regulations, there's privacy and security regulations, and then there's just general business decisions and ethics. The research regulations, we have the Office of Human Research Protections as well as the FDA. So these folks have rules such as needing institution review boards or IRBs, informed consent of participants, and how do you design protocols that may be exempt from those requirements, because it's they require it unless you have the design in there so that it's exempt, and those certain things can be very costly. The privacy regulations, we had a good presentation on that yesterday, but in research area, there's a lot of compliance risk with the privacy regulations because of lack of understanding. Everybody thinks they think what de-identified data is, but they don't know what de-identified data is defined by HIPAA of the specific safe harbor field. So we constantly have people saying, well, I just want a de-identified data set, so I don't need all the IRBs and consents, but then they want zip codes, date of birth, date of admission, and things like that. And date other than year is not in the safe harbor. So, when they say, well, I need length of stay, so I need date of admission, date of discharge, you have to coach them and say, well, why don't you just ask for length of stay instead? Let us do the calculation and get that, and then just, that one change can alleviate a lot of regulatory and startup delay, regulatory costs and startup delays. So better education on the individuals that are doing the research are key. And then the third is your basic business practices and ethics. There's cost to doing research. And any research question is a costly question for you to resource and fund to get that going forward. And then there's ethical issues. Now we're all about combining all these data sets and these big meta data sets. But what happens when you take a Catholic hospital's data set, it's combined in a larger data set, and they want to do research on abortions and birth control and all those sort of things? Well, it's very much inconsistent with what the patients going to a Catholic hospital would be expecting use of their data, but they didn't have control. And even though you have all the safeguards and all the legal stuff, the de-identification, IRB approval, and all that sort of stuff, time and time again, we've seen in a variety of states where it's all set up legally, and just because it's legal doesn't necessarily make it ethical, and people have different expectations. Even though it's legal, and even though you disclose to them on page 3 of your Notice of Privacy Practices, the fact that you didn't stand on a table, point to them, and say, we are going to use your data for this, they don't like it. So you have to take a lot of those things into consideration as well.
Right. Patrick?
Do you know what the re-identification risk in the 3 fields of sex? To see if anybody knows this. If I gave you sex, date of birth, and zip code, would you think that is 27% re-identifiable, 52% re-identifiable, or 87%?
27.
How much? It's 87%. So you can re-identify anybody in the United States using publicly available data information just on those 3 fields alone. So if I have, health information with sex, date of birth, and zip code, and all this other health information, all I need to do is get the voter registration from that zip code, and I can re-identify that person, or 87% of those people.
Thank you for that, David. Patrick and Robert, any thoughts just on your specific areas of focus of things we should just continue to be aware of as we're utilizing data to help solve our clinical needs? Okay, David kind of covered all the legal aspects of it. Okay. Okay, so in another realm, what can we begin to do to continue to address our care coordination across the different care settings?
Sure, go ahead.
So one of the, I mentioned apps, and one of the things that we are particularly interested in doing is facilitating the management of patients with chronic disease as they go across venues of care. And so actually there's a Mayo Clinic project which actually started out being a problem list management project. How do you manage the problem list? And we look at that as kind of a window into kind of going back to the days of Larry Weed and the problem-oriented medical record, that now one can really try to construct a problem-based encounter record and use that to kind of anticipate the needs of visits, but also if you manage the problems and record the findings that are present during those visits, you can update the problem list from that and update the care plan. So what you now have is a linkage between problems and care plans. And right now, our medical records are basically document-oriented. You know, we have our progress notes, we have our lab reports, we have our X-ray procedure reports, and so on. What really we think is needed is more of a process and information flow view of the care process, where we're following what's happening to a problem over time, how it's the data are being tracked relative to that to show whether there are gaps in meeting the problem goals, and what care plans are being instituted to take care of those. So we can, the idea is to be able to enable trends over time to be looked at, and gaps to be identified, and relationship between problems, medications, and achievement of goals, things like that. So that's kind of turning into a kind of a major focus.
Ours is sort of a good news, bad news story. The good news is all those levels of care that I talked about are provided within our system, our ACO, if you will, with one single EMR. So we're able to fairly seamlessly follow a patient from home through end of life and all the spots in between. The bad news part of the story is that we have a lot of patients who are co-managed or who also get care in the community. And so that care, other than what the patient shares with us, is not visible to us. And so I think that some variation of the National Health Information Exchange will help to solve that, at least in terms of giving us visibility of what other care the patient may be receiving. But it is a challenge. It is a challenge for us, and a lot of what we have to rely on is what the patient tells us.
Great.
I don't know that I have much more to add.
Okay.
It's
Just want to make
highly-
sure that everyone has an opportunity.
Oh, thank you.
In our next question, in your different organizations, what did you all do to help to motivate your providers as we've been working through the process of using the electronic medical records and solving clinical needs with our health informatics.
Well, we do have pay for performance, so how well our providers do on the performance measures, customer satisfaction, some of those kinds of things are part of their, there's some at-risk pay that's associated with that. As I indicated earlier, in many cases, it's about ensuring that everybody understands what it is that we're measuring and what's the impact on the patient. Physicians, as everybody knows, are providers, other staff tend to be quite competitive. The better real-time data we can provide in terms of how well their panel is doing, generally we get very good results with that. And education is certainly another another tool that we use. But probably the real-time information in terms of their patients and how their patients are doing is probably the best tool that we have, because they're motivated to want to provide the best care that they can. And so if we can enable that, then it's not too hard to get cooperation.
So again, I'll use the Mayo example, but I don't think we ever are going to be in a period where there isn't some grumbling about the EHR. And Mayo physicians are particularly vocal when they don't like some features. And like the VA, I think the Mayo Clinic has the advantage of having some people that, if they don't like something, will actually try to invent some solutions to improve on it. So that's where we're actually seeing some of this innovation that I've talked about really bubbling up from kind of frustrations with the way things are and trying to invent the future. So it's kind of right now at the level of a grassroots initiative, and we don't have kind of the platform in which you can really kind of invent the future and actually run it on an operational scale. But I do see that that there is at least in some of the leading organizations that kind of I guess drive to be able to kind of move beyond what the existing systems provide.
Great. And what are some of the other additional efforts that are being taken to sustain the development of the best practices and how we're able to continue to motivate the providers, as we know that there are additional upcoming changes that we will be facing?
Well, we're always evolving our performance measures so that we're not standing still in terms of what it is that we're looking at. It's a very robust process, evidence-based in terms of what we're looking at in terms of trying to improve care, or again, at least artifacts of improving care. And we engage our providers. Anybody within the VA can provide feedback on a performance measure to be able to question or challenge whatever it is. And it's a pretty rigorous process that's used to develop the measures that we look at.
Great. And in doing that, Patrick, are there additional tools that are made available to your clinicians or providers so that we know how their input is contributing to us improving care across the board?
I don't know about additional tools necessarily, but there's lots of mechanisms to provide feedback when providers have questions or issues with a particular performance measure, and ways to try to close that loop back with them. Now, individual providers can request any number of looks at data for their patient population as well. We have at our facility with 3,000 employees, we have 4 staff that work on the performance measures with our providers both real time as well as at an institutional level, so that if a particular provider is interested in some aspect of their patient population, we pull that information out of the EMR and can provide that back to them in any number of ways that they want to look at it. So that's motivating for many of our providers also.
Yes, sir.
I'm interested,
Shout
She
it
may
out.
have just stepped out for a second.
I'm interested as to what's at the top of your list in terms of areas where you believe, there's a need for clinical care improvement and a couple of different things that we apply to. I think for Bob, what's at the top of your list of areas where EHRs are holding back clinical improvements.
So what's at the top of our list in terms of EHR priorities for improving clinical care? Well, I'll indirectly answer your question in terms of where I think that the potential exists for the next major move forward for the VA. We've had the medical home for probably, we had the EMR and then primary care and then the medical home. And now we're moving into personalized health planning and health coaching for patients. It is online through the patient's e-portal, as well as for the provider and the team to look at. And I think that, and this is at the very early stages within the VA, but I think if there's going to be the next big move forward, it's going to be engaging patients in moving away from the find it, fix it model to asking the patient what do they want from their health care, what motivates them, what is it that we can do that will get them to a state of health that they want. And so I think it's going to be, the potential exists now, I think, for that to make a major change in how we keep our patients out of the hospital and manage their health.
I know for us, and I'm sure there's a spreadsheet somewhere or a PowerPoint somewhere with the official HCA goals, but we have a tremendous amount of discussion about using EHRs to prevent serious preventable adverse events. Whether it's drug-drug interactions or other types of things that are preventable, that if the information was synthesized and all aggregated in more real time, that could be avoided, where absent the electronic system, that's much more challenging. So we have a lot of focus on how the EMR system, or just general healthcare communications using an EMR as a central nervous system for that, can help with prevent those adverse events that are preventable.
Right. And I think the second part of your question, please correct me if I'm wrong, where you asked if the EHR was prohibiting us at.
Yeah, well, I mean, Bob said we're being held back by EHR legacy systems. That's what you said. And I'm interested as to know specific areas in which advancement of clinical care is perceived by the Mayo Clinic physicians or whoever to be held back as a result of the EHR systems.
Yeah, so I'm not sure that it's entirely a Mayo Clinic perspective. I'm getting this from a number of places, but it's the fragmentation of care across care venues that don't have the same EHR. And if you have to rely on HIE documents, CCDs, to provide that information, it's not really adequate. And in fact, if it produces yet another document to be reconciled, it actually adds to the workload rather than improving the workflow. So we feel that there's a lot of gap in the care process, and also in knowing what problems are going on with any given patient and what care is being done for those problems. You really have to look in many places to assemble that information for the care that you're about to give. So if we could find a way to kind of have a dashboard, if you will, of what's going on with the patient, the problems that they're being managed for and what is being done about them. I think this would be a very good kind of focus that could cut across venues. And so, that I think that right now our EHRs don't do that. I think that you have to go into, not only are they are separate from each other, but within an EHR you have to go into, the labs, the meds, the problem list, and so on. And you can't get a integrated view.
Yes, sir. Yes, John.
So the best clinical decision support tools or platforms aren't going to work unless the physicians actually use them. And I came from an institution where we were self-insured malpractice-wise and all employed. And now I'm in a place where we're in a very similar situation, and we'll be almost completely in the same situation in July. And we make decisions as institutions that say this clinical decision support's good for our patients, good for our bottom line, and you're going to use it whether you like it or not. And we've had incredible outcomes. We reduced nosocomial VTs 25%, reduced sepsis mortality 30%, and we don't really give them a choice. Now, when I go out and talk, I hear a lot of, well, the doc didn't like it, so we turned it off. The doc didn't like it, so we never implemented it. They thought it was going to be extra clicks. And we don't have evidence for everything, but in your guys' opinion, when do you think we're going to reach the point where we say, there's enough evidence for this clinical tool that you're going to use it, whether you like it or not, because it's the right thing for the patients?
Within the VA, we have the minor advantage of all of our providers are salaried, so and that doesn't, I sort of say that tongue in cheek. Physicians are driven by evidence-based care and evidence-based medicine, so providers are, and nurses and others, so I don't want to just be physician-centric. But so I think at the point that the evidence supports what it is that we're doing, or in some cases, we're going to be driven by CMS and third-party payers and other things like that. So I think that, and it's as basic as, bringing the providers in, bringing them along, letting them shoot holes in the logic and present a case why it's not good care. And if they can, well, then maybe we need to relook at the measure. If they can't, then they need to get on board and do it.
Okay, Jessica's back.
Hi. You all talked about innovation in one way or another, and Bob went into some detail on apps. Have you seen anything from the startup community that can bridge some of these gaps in clinical care?
From the what community?
Startup?
Oh,
It's interesting, if you go to HIMSS, how many people went to HIMSS? So you go along the main corridors and you don't see any startups and you don't see any innovation. Well, I'm sorry for the vendors. The vendors think they're all innovating. But if you go around, so I spend my time going around the fringes, and that's where you see all of them. But they're never going to make it to the center floor, I think, unless there's a sea change in the ability for them to interoperate with the big EHR. So we really need this push, I think, from the the provider healthcare community on what we need in terms of care flow and care processes to actually get the vendors to be responsive to that. I don't think they're going to be able to change on their own. I mentioned the bandwidth issues. I also don't think that they have the perception of the needs right now. I don't think it's going to come from the government. So I think if we're going to see response to the growing needs for ACOs and the kinds of integration around the patient-centered medical home and other kinds of and wellness and health promotion, we really need to kind of, I'm kind of a disruptive type person, so I think in terms of how do we shake up the existing system and how to get it to change. And I think our best hope is to try to get some of the leaders in the healthcare provider side of to define those needs and to get the vendors to begin to move toward it. Now, that's a very Pollyanna-ish, hope, but I think we're going to see very marginal or innovations at the margin, and they're not going to become mainstream unless we can really marshal that kind of coordinated effort. So,
I don't know how terribly innovative it is, but something that we're piloting within the VA and at Lovell is called the Get Well Network, which is an interactive tool. It's used in the inpatient setting or the long-term care setting. It's an interactive tool for the patient to use while they're at the facility, that guides them through their care plan, that informs them as far as what's happening to them, provides education, discharge planning information, medication information, entertainment, internet, those kinds of things. So, but that's the only thing that comes to mind.
I'm the president of the Nashville chapter of Angel Capital Group, which is a network. They're a management company that manages angel capital groups across the country. I think they have 6 different cities. One is in Denver, where they partner with the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. So there's innovation out there, but it's cursed with what innovation has always been cursed with. Like I said in the introductory comments, it's the entrepreneur or the inventor that's so married to the science and the technology of it. I like to say that they can't see the forest for the chloroform. Never mind the trees, they're so into chloroform they can't see the forest. And many of them are just purely resistant. They just want money for marketing dollars to say, all I need is for everybody to hear about my product, and the face of medicine will be changed. And they don't want to hear that it's a lot more complex than that. So a lot of the inventors, or certainly the inventors, don't have the patience to get through with it, and they don't like to be told no. So I think that there's 1,000 good ideas, and that's part of the reason I got into that, was to mentor some of these things. Hey, that's a fantastic idea, but you have to build a business plan around it. You have to build the economics around it. Otherwise, it's going to go the way of many good ideas. So they're out there. We're all trying, but a lot of the solutions are I've not seen anything that's a huge game changer at this point. But there's always that's always where it's going to come from.
I think
So
we
they're
have
trying.
one more
The
question.
culture's there.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
I think we have one more question in the back.
Yeah, I think this might be directed more towards David. You mentioned research projects and IRBs, and I didn't know whether you meant it's one IRB or many different IRBs depending on the project. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about consistency in the IRBs or the process that you've seen presented.
IRBs are like attorneys. You ask 2 different IRBs, you're going to get 2 different answers.
3 answers.
So it's just, and maybe 3 different answers depending on what day of the week you ask them. It's when it comes to, if you're talking, are you talking about specifically about data research or clinical trials, or just clinical trials? There's tremendous commercial pressure, at least in industry, to move to single IRB review for multi-center studies. And there's a lot of good with that, and there's a lot of pushback on that. A lot of the pushback is local control issues and things along those lines. And they may not understand some of the benefits of cooperative review with a single central IRB that can review across 50 studies for just protocol-specific the same protocol across the studies, but then any local issues would be voted at local IRBs if they have one, unless they want to defer to the central. There's certainly room. The government endorses a practice. They want to push people with the practice, but the problem that people are not embracing that practice and want to have 50 IRB reviews of a 50-center study is just that reactive hyper-protectionism of, oh God, what if something goes wrong, or local control and things like that, or fear of liability. So it's going to be there, but running an IRB nowadays is not for the faint of heart. I mean, we used to get 1 or 2 IRB audits across our system a year from the FDA, and nowadays, the past 3 years, we get 6 or 7. And there's a lot of small IRBs that what the FDA would call a lapdog IRB. It's just nice to have in your lab. That's, they're realizing how tough it is now. It's not the party planning committee. It's a highly regulated committee subject to audits, and the FDA is just beating up these small IRBs left and right. So I think that there's a definite shift. And the IRB industry is getting more innovative on that. A lot of them are bought up by venture capitals now with good business plans to expand their business, and they're getting more creative in that area. So, yeah, a lot of the IRB issue is just local culture and control issues. And if we can address that and let them know that your subjects will still be protected in clinical trials, but with an alternate oversight methodology, we may be able to get somewhere. Love to talk with you offline on this.
Great, thank you. And I think we're ready to close,
I
Jessica?
think so. Thank you so much. It was great.